All right, we're back. And now let's talk about another theory to explain emotions, and that's the Cannon-Bard theory. So again, we've got our snake as our stimulus. Now what you'll notice is different between Cannon-Bard and James Lang is you're going to experience autonomic nervous system arousal and the emotion of fear at the same time. So trembling occurs simultaneously with your recognition that you're feeling fear. So it's a simultaneous thing. Now, the support for this theory is a little less experimental, but I found on Healthline they had some really good examples of Cannon-Bard cases of emotions, and let's see if this helps you to sort of internalize maybe it makes sense or not. So they say, imagine you're at a job interview, and it's a position that you really want. You're really excited about it, and you hope that you'll be selected. Thinking about the interview might leave you feeling a little nervous or worried, right? Because you're like, well, I really want it. I don't want to mess it up. I want to make sure that I'm selected. You might also feel some physical sensations along with that, right? You might feel a little tremory, or maybe your muscles get tense. Maybe your neck gets tense overnight, right? Maybe you feel your heart rate accelerate. The closer you're getting to the interview, maybe more and more of this will be experienced. This is a good example of how your autonomic nervous system is responding to your thoughts about the possible interview. And so this sensation of nervousness or worry, this, emotion is occurring simultaneously with the physiological responses to that. How about moving into a new home, something a little happier, okay? So you've just moved in with your spouse or partner, you're very excited, got this new place. It's much larger than where you were living before, and you might even be able to, start filling up this extra rooms with the children you guys have been dreaming about. And as you're unpacking the boxes, you're feeling very happy about it, and you might even have tears well up in your eyes. Your chest might feel tight, like a little, emotional tenseness in your chest, and maybe even have a little difficulty breathing. And all of this because you're so moved by where you are now, and you're so pleased and you're so happy. And so you're having these physiological responses at the same time as you're making this awareness that, wow, we're starting our lives. This is so exciting. The emotion and the physical reaction happen simultaneously. How about something else you might be able to relate to? Let's say that you're an 8-year-old child and your parents just told you that they're separating and probably are going to get divorced. Your emotion is that you're sad, maybe you're a little angry, so maybe you're having multiple emotions at one time. Your stomach also is feeling upset, and you think that you might even throw up about it, right? And these are happening simultaneously. The feelings of sadness and anger are happening simultaneously with your feeling like I could throw up. So these aren't studies, but maybe you could relate and say, yeah, I can think of times when Cannon-Bard might be the best explanation for how my emotions tied in with my autonomic nervous system, activation. How about the Schacter-Singer theory? So still got our snake. Now in the middle, what you'll notice is we introduced a new component, which is cognitive appraisal. So according to Schacter and Singer, the autonomic nervous system activation and your cognitive appraisal happen at the same time. So you're like, heart rate goes up and you think, snake at the same time. Exactly the same time. And those two things combined lead you to have this emotion that in this case would be fear. I'm trembling and there's a snake, so I must be scared, right? So I'm trembling, I see a snake. This thing that I'm feeling in my body must be fear, right? So support for that, here's a picture that was taken in a soccer riot where a bunch of people got crushed and bad things happened. Why would this happen? Well, this is called a spillover effect. You've got arousal, yay, my team won, or oh, my team lost, right? So you're either like super happy or you're super sad because of your team's performance. And that can spill over into the next thing that you're doing, influencing the response. So as you're exiting the stadium, maybe you go from elation that your team won to taunting the supporters of the other team, who go from sadness that their team lost to anger that these people are taunting them. And so that can fuel anger, and you can end up with rioting and other violent things, that's exactly what happened in the, this is the aftermath of that in the picture that we're looking at. The fact that the spillover effect exists is offered as support for the Schacter-Singer theory. This idea that I'm feeling all aroused, and it's because not only did my team lose, but that jerk is wearing a shirt to support the other team. That jerk, that loser, right? And so now all my frustration over the loss gets transferred over onto the person who had supported the winning team. And so now we have these confrontations. All right, Lazarus's theory. Got a lot of theories, don't we? This theory says cognitive appraisal happens on its own. So you go, oh no, a snake. And that leads to the simultaneous experience of the emotion of fear and the autonomic nervous system response. So I think this is a dangerous situation, and that is why I'm afraid and trembling, right? So I've made my assessment, and that's going to allow me to correctly label the emotion that I'm experiencing and the autonomic nervous system stimulation that I'm experiencing. This theory has been mostly applied to stress. It has not been really used too much to explain other emotions like happiness or surprise or other like enjoyable things for sure. It's been mostly used to explain how we cope with stress. And so, for example, if we see that we have to take a test, and if we look at that test as a threat, oh no, our cognitive appraisal is that it's a threat. And we say, oh no, I'm not going to do very well. Math isn't my best thing, and this is a big math test. That cognitive appraisal of it being a threat leads to the emotion of fear and the autonomic nervous system arousal that makes it probably more likely we do poorly on the test too, right? Because we're so nervous about it. If on the other hand, our cognitive appraisal is, hey, I've been really studying. This is just an opportunity to show what I know. So we cognitively appraise the test as a challenge rather than as a threat. Then it's more likely to lead to the emotion of, confidence or pride. And our autonomic nervous system, even if it's feeling aroused, will interpret that as, supportive of us being able to do our best on the test. We won't be stressed to distraction. We'll instead be focused because we're going to be using those emotions to focus us. So it's mostly been used to explain stress, and that cognitive appraisal, I just wanted to kind of explain what that means, right? Like if you're seeing the stimulus as a threat, that you're more likely to label the emotion as something negative and the autonomic nervous system response as something negative. If you cognitively appraise the situation as a challenge, then it's more likely that you'll interpret that in a positive way emotionally, and how you interpret that autonomic nervous system response. So let's put all the theories next to each other. And actually there's a fifth theory that's out now, and I just thought, this is good enough. Let's compare these theories, put them all side by side. And so you can see, where the first two have all three components in common, right? So the first two, James Lang and Cannon-Bard, they have all three things in common. James Lang is seeing them as a stage by stage thing with three different stages to go through, whereas Cannon-Bard is looking at as two stages where, autonomic nervous system stimulation and the emotion happen simultaneously. The bottom two have added in cognitive appraisal as part of their explanation. And that's really a sign that the bottom two are more recent theories. James Lang and Cannon-Bard were very early on in psychology's history, and cognitive appraisal was not really just an important part of the theories and things that were being created in the early part of our field. Cognitive appraisal really started to come on the scene in the 60s and 70s for sure. And so that's one of the ways that you can tell that these are newer theories. They're very similar, right? Again, what moves is just like in the difference between James Lang and Cannon-Bard, the ANS moves from the middle in James Lang to being simultaneous in Cannon-Bard. That's what happens when you look at Schacter-Singer versus Lazarus, right? Schacter-Singer thinks the ANS should be in the middle, and Lazarus thinks it should be combined with emotion fear on the side. So if you kind of think about it like that, the theories are kind of similar. right? It's our debate is, when does the autonomic nervous system, activate? Is it before or at the same time as the emotion? And then we can kind of compare older theories to newer theories on this quality of adding in the cognitive appraisal. Both of these modern theories put the cognitive appraisal, before the emotion. They both agree with that. The issue is whether the autonomic nervous system stimulation happens at the same time. So it makes it a little simpler if you can kind of group them like that, I think. It's probably 3 too many theories to be explaining emotion. But the problem with it is that, each of these theories kind of explains different emotional experiences that we've had, right? Or that they can replicate in a study. And so they all are sort of competing right now. They all are present. Most modern researchers like the cognitive appraisal component of it. So, they're the Schacter-Singer and the Lazarus are a little bit more popular right now than the James Lang and the Cannon-Bard. Because I think we all agree that there's a cognitive component to emotions, right? So newer theories. So I'm going to throw in this newer theory just to make it, so see how I've lumped Lazarus and then Schacter and Singer together over there, because what we see is there's the event on the left, you see the arrow go up to appraisal, and then you see emotional response down at the bottom. So you can see both Lazarus and Schacter and Singer. If we go back here, I've left out part of it in that little model, but you see that's basically right. You've got the stimulus, you've got the cognitive appraisal, you've got the emotion. Their debate is where the autonomic nervous system part comes in. So we've got them represented in the event, appraisal, emotional response component of this. And you can imagine that this represents the thinking high road version of what's going on in our heads, right? So you've got the fear stimulus coming in. While there might be an immediate fear response, they're not, Lazarus and Schacter and Singer are not as interested in that. They're interested in, how it gets appraised, which means they're going to wait a beat for it to get up to the prefrontal cortex and have you make sense of it, and then have an emotional response. So you can imagine that the Lazarus model and the Schacter and Singer model go, follow that arrow. I don't know if you guys can see my arrow if I follow it, but fear stimulus, up here to thalamus, back to visual cortex, up to prefrontal cortex, and then maybe to the amygdala if we've decided it really is something scary. Like that's how Lazarus and Schacter and Singer think it goes. Zions has a model. Ledoux has a model. These are 2 different models that are very similar. What they both conclude is that the event leads to an emotional response. So they're basically arguing for the speedy low road interpretation, that the fear stimulus comes in, hits the thalamus, and out comes a fear response. In that fear response, Zions and Ledoux both agree that the emotion will be part of that you'll recognize it as fear in this case, and that'll happen automatically. So we've got these newer models. They're kind of similar. I'm going to pop backwards for a second. They're kind of similar to the James Lang and Cannon-Bard interpretation because they're leaving out the cognitive appraisal component. But Zions and Ledoux don't really talk about when does the autonomic nervous system part kick in. They don't really talk about that part. They just really go right to, stimulus, emotion. Stimulus, emotion. They don't really talk about the autonomic nervous system. So they're a little bit different in their design. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up with a big picture conclusion. The arousal component of emotion is regulated by the autonomic nervous system divisions, right? We got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Under the sympathetic, in a crisis, the fight or flight response automatically mobilizes the body for action. Like in a crisis, you've got your natural instinctual fight or flight response. What I wanted to add on here as a big picture thing to think about is because of that arousal, being aroused while doing something can affect your performance in different ways depending on that task. So if you're doing a difficult task, so here you are, you're a little child in this picture on the top, and you've been taking piano lessons all year, and it's time for your piano recital. And at home, you've been practicing and practicing, and you know your own keyboard, and you're there by yourself, and maybe you get heard by other people in the house, but nobody's sitting there watching you, and you're not dressed in your formal clothes, and everything's fine when you're at home, and you completely know your performance. But you get to your piano recital, and all of a sudden, the thing that you thought that you knew so well and you could perform so well, you make a mistake and you're so embarrassed and you feel like everybody's laughing at you because you can't even play your own piece. That's really common when you have a difficult task. If you are overly aroused, in the case of a little kid who's maybe nervous and anxious and maybe a little embarrassed and stuff like that, their performance might not be as good. They may actually suffer because people are watching. Right? So having higher levels of arousal while having an audience there may inhibit performance. Interestingly, though, performance peaks at higher levels for easy or well-learned tasks. So I got a picture of, Eastern playing a home game. And one of the things that we see in sports is that there are really strong home field advantages. That's not to say that, playing football is easy. That's not the implication. I'm trying to say well-learned tasks in this example. So if you've been practicing in that stadium and football contains a lot of overlearned behaviors like running and catching and things like that. There's a lot of variables that can make it mess up, but there are a lot of overlearned behaviors. And so when you get in front of your home field crowd that's cheering on your side, they want you to do well, that might be the kind of arousal that actually causes you to perform better than you would have otherwise. And so, it really depends on the task, whether emotions, enhance our performance or undermine our performance. It really matters what kind of task we're performing, how well we've learned the task, how much overlearning we've experienced. And so those are the important things to keep in mind with regard to the role of the sympathetic nervous system in performance of behaviors, even if we're experiencing an emotion, right? And we're experiencing arousal. All right, so that's my big picture thought for this section. I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I will see you in the next module.